Dr. L. Muhindro, Director, Research and Development Cell, SK Women's College, in order to introduce our resource person.
Good afternoon, dear friends. My topic, National Education Policy and Gender Promotion, a critical review. The National Education Policy 2020 is a comprehensive framework designed to transform India's educational system. It includes promoting women's empowerment and gender equality. This study examines how the strategy addresses gender differences in learning outcomes, retention, and access to education. It also explores how the National Education Policy challenges gender stereotypes and promotes an inclusive environment for all students. The effectiveness of curricular changes, teacher training, and creating safe spaces in institutions is analyzed. Lastly, recommendations are proposed to enhance the National Education Policy effectiveness in promoting women's empowerment and gender equality in education. The background of the study: as a developing nation, India is experiencing significant educational fragmentation as seen by the numerous small higher educational institutions affiliated with large universities. Following independence, the Indian government had many challenges. India decided in 2015 to endorse the Fourth Sustainable Development Goal of the United Nations, which reads, "Provide inclusive and equitable quality education and encourage lifelong learning opportunities for all." Because the current educational system was unable to achieve the intended long-term goal, the government implemented an education policy. A society aiming for growth and inclusivity must prioritize gender equality. India's National Education Policy 2020 is a transformative framework that recognizes education's role in social development. It aims to address gender inequities and ensure that all individuals can fully participate in and benefit from education. A more comprehensive and multidisciplinary approach to education, a focus on early childhood care and education, subject choice, flexibility, technological integration, and acceptance of vocational educations are just a few of the significant changes brought about by the National Education Policy 2020. To ensure that both genders may participate equally in educational institutions, it is imperative to examine whether these reforms successfully address the underlying gender-based impediments. This study adds to the ongoing conversation on gender mainstreaming in the education sector by highlighting areas where the policy can be strengthened, such as creating a curriculum that is sensitive to gender, creating safe spaces, and enhancing the capacity of educators and administrators. It is to investigate how the National Education Policy 2020 might be a game changer for promoting gender equality and female empowerment in the educational system in India. It is intended that this study will add to the larger discussions on creating an inclusive and empowering learning environment that benefits everyone, regardless of gender identity, by critically examining the policy's provisions and providing practical recommendations. Here, in gender equality in the 2020 NEP agenda, there have been numerous significant and inclusive enhancement and to the NEP enhancement met the NEP 2020. Furthermore, as gender inclusion fund should be established to support transgender and female students' access to equal educational opportunities, and the public spending for education should rise to 6% GDP. In contrast, the NEP's report on gender inclusion in education hardly mentions the word gender. Creating a gender-inclusive learning environment requiring mandatory gender-based prejudice awareness workshops and providing teachers training in gender-sensitive pedagogy and inclusive classroom management are just a few of the policy's lofty objectives. Moreover, the strategy does not refer to a thorough action plan for methodologically accomplishing these objectives. Although the policy mentions gender-inclusive learning environments, it ignores how gender is culturally constructed as anything other than a set of binary categories. National Education Policy 2020, Gender Inclusive Attitudes and Gender Discrimination, reduce the gender gap and increase female literacy rates, all of which support women empowerment. Concentrate on creating programs and policies for female students from low-income families, giving female more information, help them make more informed decisions, which benefits economies, communities, and the families. Girls who have an education are more aware of their rights and the value of looking after their physical and mental health. A better chance of reaching their full potential and landing a rewarding job. Social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter were flooded with different points of view once the NEP was adopted. Numerous studies have emphasized the importance of NEP for faculty and instructors in higher education. National Education Policy 2020 has a focus on inclusion and equity. As a provision for establishing a gender inclusion fund, the establishment of the Gender Inclusion Fund is a positive step in guaranteeing that all transgender and female students have access to high-quality education. The intersections of National Education Policy 2020 and women's rights. The intersections of the National Education Policy 2020 and women's rights in India offers a significant opportunity to tackle the complex challenges of women. With its ambitious goals and transformative education agenda, NEP 2020 can greatly advance women's rights in various ways. Number A. Gender inclusive education. NEP 2020 emphasizes gender inclusive education by ensuring equal opportunities for girls and boys. It promotes the enrollment and the retention of girls in institutions, aiming to create a more equitable environment that addresses educational disparities and empowers girls with the knowledge and the skills for their personal and professional growth. Number B. Empowering female teachers. The policy recognizes the essential role of female teachers as role models and mentors for girls. NEP 2020 promotes the recruitment of more female teachers, especially in remote and crucial areas, to serve as strong role models. Investing in professional development for female teachers empowers them to inspire girls to pursue their educational and career ambitions. Number C. Holistic curriculum. NEP 2020 advocates for a holistic, skill-oriented curriculum that overcomes traditional rote learning. This reform empowers girls by providing practical skills applicable in diverse fields, fostering critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity, thereby enhancing their academic and professional success. Number D. Gender sensitization. The policy emphasizes the need for gender sensitizations by implementing programs for teachers and students to enhance awareness of gender issues and promote equality. NEP 2020 seeks to create a more inclusive institutional environment to combat gender discrimination and stereotypes. Critical assessment. The National Education Policy 2020 promotes women's rights in education but also encounters critics and challenges. The National Education Policy includes several goals and policies intended to advance gender equality and empowerment in the educational system. The policy acknowledges how critical it is to eliminate gender inequality and guarantee that everyone, regardless of gender, has equal access to opportunities. Number 1, implementation gap. A major challenge is the effective implementation of policies provisions. Although NEP 2020 outlines initiatives for gender inclusive education, actual execution, especially in marginalized communities and the remote areas, remain difficult. Implementation gaps arise from insufficient resources, infrastructure, and trained personnel. Ensuring the policy effectively reaches and benefits women and girls in under-reserved regions is essential. Number 2, socioeconomic disparities. NEP 2020 is a significant step, but it cannot alone resolve the deep-seated socioeconomic disparities limiting women's access to education. Barriers such as poverty, inadequate healthcare, and cultural norms continue to hinder girls' education. To foster an environment that encourages girls to attend and remain in institutions, complementary policies and initiatives targeting these broader issues are essential. To ensure equitable access to quality education for all children, NEP 2020 emphasizes inclusive education and promotes a welcoming environment that values diversity, gender equality, and non-discrimination. The policy emphasizes a gender-sensitive curriculum that challenges stereotypes, promotes equality, and considers the needs of both boys and girls, reflecting diverse experiences in various academic fields. Number 4, elimination of gender-based violence. NEP 2020 aims to create a safe environment for students by addressing gender-based violence in educational institutions. It encourages procedures to combat such violence and enforce anti-harassment policies and women's grievance cells. Number 5, women's empowerment in education leadership. The policy places a strong emphasis on empowering women to hold leadership positions in education, including management and administrative positions. It supports capacity building initiatives to increase women's representation and engagement in educational institutions and promotes the nomination of women to decision-making roles. Number 6, skill development and entrepreneurship. The policy recognizes business and skill development's role in promoting gender equality and empowering women, advocating for equal access to vocational education, skill training, and entrepreneurship for girls and women. Potential impact. Number A, improve gender parity. By tackling structural obstacles and prejudices, NEP 2020 may help achieve more gender parity in education. The policy can help enhance girls' women's enrollment, retention, and educational attainment by offering equal opportunities and support networks. Number B, challenging gender stereotypes. Traditional gender stereotypes may be challenged by the inclusive learning environment and the gender-sensitive curriculum that the NEP 2020 promotes. Students may be able to reject biased practices and cultivate critical thinking abilities in more fair learning environment as a result. Number C, empowering women in education. Students can benefit from the policy's focus on women's empowerment in educational leadership through access to mentors and role models. The NEP 2020 can empower and inspire future generations by increasing the number of women in positions of decision making, thereby advancing gender equality both inside and outside of the educational system. Effectiveness of the NEP 2020. The NEP 2020's implementation's oversight and assessment will determine how well it addresses gender gaps in education. Although the strategy shows a thorough approach to advancing gender equality, its efficacy should be evaluated. Implementation strategies. Effective strategies and action plans must be developed and implemented in order for NEP 2020 to be implemented successfully. In order to guarantee a coordinated strategy towards accomplishing gender equality goals, this includes collaborations with stakeholders, targeted interventions for marginalized groups, and capacity building programs for educators and administrators. Number B, adequate resource allocations. For the NEP 2020's gender equality provisions to be implemented effectively, sufficient financial and human resources must be allocated. To meet the unique needs of girls and the marginalized groups, adequate resources should be set aside to assist curriculum development, teachers training, and the establishment of secure learning environments and support networks. Number C, monitoring and the evaluation framework. A strong monitoring and evaluation system should be established by NEP 2020 in order to keep tabs on developments, spot gaps, and gauge the effectiveness of its gender equality program. To enable evidence-based decision-making and promote policy revisions, this would entail gathering disaggregated data on academic performance, enrollment, retention, and other pertinent variables. Number D, collaboration and stakeholders engagement. For the NEP 2020 to be implemented successfully, cooperation and involvement with a range of stakeholders, including government agencies, civil society organizations, educators, parents, and students are crucial. The effectiveness of the policy in advancing gender equality in education can be increased by establishing collaborations and encouraging communications, which can make it easier to share best practices, resources, and expertise. International frameworks for promoting gender equality and the NEP. A crucial component of evaluating the National Education Policy 2020's efficacy and possible influence is determining how well it aligns with global frameworks and best practices for advancing gender equality in education. Alignment with Sustainable Development Goals for inclusive and equitable quality education.
The National Education Policy 2020 aligns closely with Sustainable Development Goal 4, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Specifically, Goal 4.5 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which seeks to eliminate gender disparities in education, aligns well with NEP 2020's emphasis on inclusive education, gender-sensitive curricula, and closing gender gaps in educational achievements. Let's see on this table alignment between National Education Policy 2020 and the Sustainable Goal 4.5. Here in this table, I made number 1 column is a Sustainable Development Goal target, and the number 2 column NEP 2020's commitment, and the third column impact. Here in this Sustainable Development Goals target, eliminate gender disparities in education. In the commitment, NEP 2020 promotes universal enrollment and the retention of girls at all levels, and in the impact, increase female literacy rates and participate in education. Ensure equal access to all levels of education for vulnerable groups. In the commitment, NEP 2020 provides scholarships, financial aid, and flexible learning pathways for marginalized girls. And in impact, reduces dropout rates and promotes higher education participation. Here in the Sustainable Development Goal, develop gender-sensitive curricula. In the commitment, NEP 2020 supports the removal of gender stereotypes in textbooks and educational materials, and in the impact, encourages gender equity in learning and challenges traditional biases. And in the Sustainable Development Goal, promote gender-responsive teacher training. In the commitment, emphasizes training teachers to create inclusive classrooms, and in the impact, leads to a more supportive learning environment for girls. And in the goal, expand technical, vocational, and STEM education for girls. STEM means science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Commitment encourages STEM participations and entrepreneurship programs for women. In impact, enhances career opportunities and economic empowerment for women. Then let's see National Education Policy 2020's alignment with SIDO. The National Education Policy 2020 aligns with the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discriminations Against Women by promoting gender equality, women's leadership, and elimination of gender-based violence in education. SIDO, adopted by the United Nations in 1979, outlines key principles to end discriminations against women, particularly in education, employment, and leadership, values that NEP 2020 upholds. Let's see on this table alignment between NEP 2020 and the SIDO. The first column is a SIDO tenets on education, and on the second column, NEP 2020's commitment, and the third column is the impact. Let's see the first row of the SIDO tenets. Equal access to education for girls and women, and NEP 2020's commitment. NEP 2020 promotes universal enrollment, retention, and financial support for girls. And in the impact, reduces gender gap in literacy and higher education participation. Again, in the tenets, eliminating gender-based discrimination and stereotypes in education. In the commitment, emphasizes gender-sensitive curricula and inclusive teaching practices. And impact helps challenge societal biases and promote equality. In the tenets, is balance in educational institutions. In the commitment, strengthens anti-harassment policies and enforces safe learning environments. And impact encourages girl retention in institutions by ensuring safety. Let's see again in the safety tenets. Promoting women's leadership in education. In the commitment, supports women's representation in leadership, administration, and policy making roles. And in the impact, increases female role models in the education sector. And in the last one, tenets, expanding vocational training and economic opportunities for women. In the commitment, integrates skill development, STEM programs, and entrepreneurship initiatives for women. And impact enhances economic empowerment and workforce participations. Alignment with UNESCO's gender equality. The National Education Policy 2020 aligns with UNESCO Gender Equality in Education Framework, which highlights the need for curriculum reform, teacher training, gender-sensitive policies, and data collection to address gender disparities in education. NEP 2020's commitment to inclusive education, gender-sensitive curricula, and data-driven decision-making reflects UNESCO's approach to achieving gender equality in education. So, let's see on this table. The first column is a UNESCO's gender equality priorities, and the second column NEP 2020's commitment, and the third column is the impact. The first one of the UNESCO curriculum reform to promote gender equality, and in the commitment, NEP 2020 emphasizes gender-sensitive curricula to eliminate stereotypes and promote inclusivity. And in the impact, helps students challenges biases and develop equitable perspective. And again, in the UNESCO, teachers preparations and gender-sensitive training. In the commitment, NEP 2020's support teachers training on gender sensitivity to foster inclusive classroom environments. And the impact encourages equal participations and supports gender inclusive teaching methods. In the UNESCO, gender sensitive policies and safe learning environments. In the commitment, strengthens anti-harassment measures and promotes safe institutions for girls. And the impact enhances retention rate and ensures secure learning spaces. And in the UNESCO, data collection and evidence-based decision-making. In the commitment, NEP 2020 encourages systematic data gathering on gender disparities to inform policies. In impact, supports targeted interventions and progress tracking. And in the UNESCO, equal access to education and leadership opportunities for women. And commitment encourages female leadership in education, administration, and expands STEM and vocational training for girls. In the impact, increases women's participation in decision-making roles and economic empowerment. NEP 2020 is incorporation of international best practices. The National Education Policy 2020 integrates international best practices for promoting gender equality in education, aligning with successful strategies used in countries that have made significant progress in this area. The policy includes key components such as gender-sensitive curricula, safe learning environments, and women's empowerment in educational leadership, all of which have proven effective globally. Let's see on this table international best practice reflected in NEP 2020. The first column I put here as a best practice, and the second column is a successful implementations in different countries, and the third one is the NEP 2020's commitment. Let's see the first one in the best practice. Gender-sensitive curricula, which implemented in Sweden, Finland, integrated gender-responsive education to remove stereotypes. And in the NEP 2020 commitment, NEP 2020 emphasizes curriculum reform to promote gender equality. And again, in the best practice, safe and inclusive learning environments. In the successful Canada, Germany, strong anti-harassment policies and safe institution environments. And in the commitment, NEP 2020 enforces anti-harassment policies, grievance redressal mechanism, and gender-sensitive infrastructure. And again, in the best practice, women in educational leadership, and in the successful Norway and Rwanda, high female representations in education leadership. And in the commitment, NEP 2020 encourages women's participations in institution administration and policy making. Then let's see in the best practice, STEM and vocational training for girls. In the successful South Korea and the USA, targeted initiatives to increase women's participations in STEM. And in the commitment of the NEP 2020 expands STEM opportunities, vocational education, and entrepreneurship training for women. And in the best practice, data-driven gender equality policies. And in the successful UK and Australia, use of gender disaggregated data to inform policies. In the commitment, NEP 2020 supports systematic data collection and monitoring of gender disparities. Discussion. The National Education Policy strongly advocates for an inclusive approach to education, ensuring that gender equality and diversity are integral to the learning environment. Key aspects of this approach include: number one, equal opportunities for all. The policy stresses the need to eliminate gender-based disparities, ensuring that students of all genders have access to quality education without discrimination. Number two, safe and supportive learning spaces. Institutions encourages to create harassment-free, gender-sensitive environments where students feel safe and respected. And in number three, gender-inclusive curriculum, integrating gender sensitivity, equity, and social inclusion into textbooks and teaching methodologies to challenge stereotypes and promote diversity. Number four, support for marginalized and underrepresented groups. Special provisions for girls, transgender students, and students from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds to ensure their full participation in education. Number five, holistic development and sensitization. Encouraging programs and training that educate teachers, students, and staff about gender inclusivity, creating a more accepting and progressive educational culture. Then let me come to the regarding gender stereotype in the curriculum. The National Education Policy 2020 takes a a progressive step towards gender equality by advocating for a gender-sensitive curriculum that challenges stereotypes and promote inclusivity. Key aspects of this initiative includes: number one, eliminating gender bias in textbooks, ensuring that educational materials portray diverse and empowering roles of all genders, moving beyond traditional stereotypes. Number two, inclusive teaching practices, encouraging teachers to adopt gender-sensitive pedagogies, fostering an environment where all students feel valued and represented. Incorporating diverse perspectives, integrating stories, case studies, and the historical contributions from women, transgender individuals, and marginalized groups, offering a broader and more inclusive worldview. Number four, promoting critical thinking on gender issues, encouraging discussions on gender equality, rights, and social justice to help students develop awareness and empathy. Number five, encouraging equal participation, creating a learning atmosphere where students of all genders are motivated to explore academics, leadership roles, and extracurricular activities without bias. Regarding women empowerment in education, learning, leadership, one of the key strengths of the National Education Policy 2020 is its strong emphasis on women's empowerment in educational leadership, recognizing the importance of gender representations in decision making. The policy aims to, number one, increase women representation in leadership, encouraging greater participation of women in administrative and management roles in schools, colleges, and universities. Number two, fair and inclusive decision making, promoting policies that ensure women have a voice in shaping educational policies, governance, and institutional reforms. Number three, capacity building programs supporting leadership development, mentorship, and training programs to equip women with the necessary skills and confidence to take on leadership positions. Number four, institutional support and policy reforms, advocating for gender-sensitive policies, equal opportunity, and workplace flexibility to remove barriers that prevent women from advancing in leadership roles. Number five, encouraging women participations in policy formulation, ensuring that women educators, administrators, and policymakers are actively involved in framing and implementing educational reforms at all levels. By empowering women in leadership, NEP 2020 fosters a more balanced, inclusive, and equitable education system, ensuring that women's perspectives contribute to shaping the future of education. Then let me come to the suggestions. Enhancing the National Education Policy 2020 through robust monitoring and the assessment systems. To align National Education Policy 2020 more closely with global education standards, it is essential to establish a strong monitoring and the evaluation mechanisms. A well-structured system would enable systematic tracking of progress, identification of gaps, and timely policy adjustment, ensuring effective implementations and maximum impact. Key components of strong monitoring and evaluation framework. Number one, establish a real-time data collection system to track enrollment, retention, and learning outcomes by gender and the social categories. Number two, conduct annual reviews with input from teachers, students, and gender experts to assess effectiveness. Number three,
set up an independent monitoring body to ensure accountability and transparency. Number 4, strengthen anonymous reporting system for gender-related issues in schools and the colleges and the universities. Number 5, align assessments with UNESCO, CEDAW and Sustainable Development Goals indicators to measure gender equality progress. Then in the conclusion, National Education Policy 2020 presents a valuable opportunity to tackle these challenges, but successful implementation is crucial. Effectively executing the policy, gender-sensitive provisions is vital for ensuring that women and girls fully benefit from the educational reforms. The NEP 2020's research on advancing gender equality and empowerment offers important national perspectives on the policy's advantages, disadvantages, and possible effects. The results clarify several NEP 2020 issues and provide suggestions for improving the program's ability to combat gender inequality in education. Although the NEP 2020 recognizes gender differences in enrollment and access, it is learned that specific interventions are required to overcome the unique obstacles that girls encounter. Scholarships, transportation services, and raising community awareness of the value of female education are necessary. Girls' educational outcomes may improve and enrollment may rise as a result. The focus on creating such a curriculum in NEP 2020 is in line with best practices. Nonetheless, it is imperative to guarantee the successful execution of the curriculum by means of ongoing supervision and teachers' training initiatives. Policymakers and educational institutions will need to work together and make consistent investments in order to achieve this. The relevance of rigorously implementing anti-harassment rules, awareness programs, and support systems for the relevance of rigorously implementing anti-harassment rules, awareness programs, and support systems for survivors, even as the NEP 2020 acknowledges the importance of safe learning environments. To create a conducive atmosphere for learning, it is essential to ensure the safety and the security of all students, particularly girls. It is admirable that NEP 2020 has such a strong focus on increasing the number of women in positions of decision-making, enhancing networking, professional development, and membership and mentorship programs can boost women's involvement and impact in educational leadership. In order to evaluate how well the NEP 2020 addresses gender imbalances, this paper highlights the significance of a strong monitoring and evaluation structure to monitor progress, spot gaps, and support evidence-based decision-making. Regular data collection, analysis, and reporting are crucial. With these few observations and analysis, I wind up my lecture. Thank you very much.